told you I had a damn good show today. From one great guest to another, KJ No. KJ No is, there we are. KJ No is a journalist, political analyst, writer, and teacher specializing in the geopolitics of the Asia Pacific region. Contributor to the book, Capitalism on a Ventilator, once censored by Amazon. You can get it on iacenter.org. You can also find KJ on the Breakthrough News Network on the China Report. You will get a taste of him here. Definitely check him out there. He is great guest. How you doing, KJ? You doing okay this morning? This early morning for you. I got to get time zones right. You doing okay this morning? How you doing?
I'm doing okay. Thank you for asking. How about yourself?
Man, I am doing good. It's late here, but no issues. Good day so far. Good show. As long as the show goes well, my day goes fine. I sent you an email on something. I got to start here because I'm just curious. We very rarely talk about internal politics of China. And like any country, I would imagine it's not a monolith. I would imagine there are factions, there are disagreements, political fractures, and all of these other things. But when we're talking about countries, we rarely talk about those things. When we talk about China, it's Xi Jinping, or Russia, it's Putin, as if these are the only people that are in the country. I stumbled across a woman that I really think is a lunatic, but I'm not certain, who was making this argument that a coup was developing in China because Xi Jinping was apparently not long for the world. And when Xi Jinping goes in 2 years, that there's going to be this kind of military revolution of a general that effectively is playing the role of Prigozhin. And the longer she spoke, the more I thought she was insane. But again, I don't live there. I don't know the politics of China. And considering that video had like 30,000 in 4 hours, I thought I'd bring it up to you because that is going to be a 100,000 view video. And I'm curious on your take on this.
There are a lot of insane people spewing insane theories about China. They know absolutely nothing. This woman, when you sent me the link, I knew who it was even before I clicked on it. This woman, certifiably insane.
I'm glad you did, because I went through a good 45 minutes of the video and I'm like, okay, I think she's nuts.
Yeah. Well, I mean, she constructs her videos in a slick fashion. So clearly, whoever is doing this is working with money and producers and script writers, etc. So whatever's going on here is deliberate, manufactured propaganda. But it's essentially the general message of all her videos is China is on the verge of collapse. And it's on the verge of collapse from internal contradictions. And this is a theme that goes all the way back to the Clintons and before. Essentially, it's simply a variation of China is socialist, and therefore it cannot but collapse. It's just part of that general US propaganda mythology that says that socialism is not viable. Anything that pretends to be socialism is either not socialism, it's really capitalism masquerading as socialism, or it is going to collapse of its own internal contradiction. So she's just, she's just a little, variant on that theme. But you look through her videos, she is certifiably insane from top to bottom. She says that China's population is not 1.4 billion. She says China's population is actually 3 million. Right? They're only 3 million because the streets are empty and people, are, dying in droves, and they all died off during COVID. She is certifiably a whack job. If she said those things, you would have to call, psychiatric help. But because she's reading a script that is manufactured by some very, very well-funded propagandists, she gets this huge following, and people actually believe her. Now, one way of looking at her is that she's like a female version of Gordon Chang. Gordon Chang is the quote-unquote China scholar who has been predicting that China is going to fall anytime for the past 25 years, right? Every year he has to update his predictions. Every year, it's the next year. It just tomorrow never comes, but he just keeps on doing that. And people refer to Gordon Chang as really a Chinese agent because he lulls Americans into believing that they don't have to do anything. China is just going to fall of its own accord. I think that's a little bit too, clever. But there are people who believe this, and really it comes down to an ideological belief. There's some part of their makeup that literally has to believe that the Western capitalist system is the best system, that it is the only system, as Margaret Thatcher called it. There is no alternative.
Right.
And in their minds, anything that is not capitalist has to fail. So that's the general framing from which they start from. And then they look for little things that validate whatever paranoid beliefs that they have. I mean, the fact is that there have been some, kind of arrests of high-ranking, officials in China. And this is the promise that Xi Jinping came in with when he started his, government. He said that we're going to go after the flies and the tigers, right? Where everybody is held to the same standard. And it really is very, very impressive, Jamal. I mean, if you are a high-ranking government official in China, you do not get to serve in the government in the area where you went to school or in your hometown. You are always dispatched to a foreign, province, because the assumption is that if you have personal connections from school or from where you were raised and grew up, then there's a kind of temptation for nepotism. So
Right.
high-ranking Chinese officials, they never get to serve in the same area that they either grew up or went to school. They're always dispatched somewhere else. It's a little bit like, it's a weak analogy, but if you can think of like juries where they move a trial to another jurisdiction because they assume that you can be more neutral and objective. I mean, there are many problems with that, but in theory, it's similar to that idea. Another thing that Chinese officials do is what was the U.S. Supreme Court doing on Thanksgiving? Well, they were probably meeting with their families, and they were going duck hunting and stuff like that. Okay.
Yeah.
Chinese officials generally, by and large, if you're high-ranking or even a middle-ranking Chinese official, they expect you on national holidays like the Chinese equivalent of Thanksgiving to go and visit people's houses, especially people who are low income, and deliver them gifts.
What? What? That's so random. Okay, wait a minute. I'm sorry to interrupt people. I was like, oh, you want to interrupt? They, in a political sense, wait a minute. Is this a law? Is this just a political sense?
Well, the first piece is policy. The first piece about serving outside of your region, that is policy. And the second piece is guidance from the party. The party says that on holidays, you go out and you serve the people. You serve the people, you visit people in their houses. And it's not just, it's not a publicity act, because nobody's there with cameras. It's what you're expected to do. There are no cameras there, but you go and you visit, low income houses, and you deliver them, gifts. I mean, can you imagine if Nancy Pelosi had to, go to Hunters Point and, give people in Hunters Point gifts? No, inconceivable. But it all has to do with the concept is that you serve the people. If you have any modicum of privilege in the bureaucratic system, your job is to serve the people. And this constant approach to cleaning up the system. Corruption is not tolerated. And that has to do not simply with the notion of good governance. Chinese governance is largely meritocratic, Uh, but it also has to do with the understanding is that the US is seeking to undermine China. And one of the ways that they undermine China is through corruption and bribery. And so
Right.
they want, the oligarchs and the high-ranking officials to buy properties abroad and to shuffle their money outside, to Western banks, and then eventually they get compromised. And then, it's the it's the model that they used against the Soviet Union, essentially create a comprador class that is willing to sell its country out. You want a country of Zelenskys that are willing to sell their country out. And that's how you bring it down. And probably the best example of this was the former mayor of Chongqing, Bo Xilai, who was caught having very, very close ties to MI6. In fact, it's suspected that his wife had, an affair with an MI6 officer, British, Secret Service.
Honeypot.
Yes,
Male honeypot.
male honeypot. Yes, gigolo. Yeah, gigolo honeypot. So anyway, Bo Xilai was taken out of the picture. But in the meantime, you can see how he had all the trappings, sending his children abroad and et cetera, et cetera. So there's a way in which there's a systemic attempt to undermine China through corruption, because this is what capitalism excels in. In capitalism, corruption is the system. That's why in our country, in the United States, we say that free speech is money is free speech, which is another way of saying that corruption is politics. The system is corrupt here, and they're trying to bring in that same level of corruption. And there's a strong resistance to that on the part of Xi Jinping. And because of that, Xi Jinping has been labeled authoritarian. When the US uses the term authoritarian, they simply mean a country which is capable of resisting US hegemonic control and corruption.
Right. Yeah, Brian Beletic often talks about controlling your media space, controlling education, like meaning these are ways that the West infects itself in the other countries, where at some point you look up and all of a sudden your media, your education, your these kind of like cultural things all point in a particular direction where the government has a much harder time controlling itself. And yeah, I mean, that's the rub, right? If you allow Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube into your country, and they don't allow you to be pro-China or pro-Russia, but you can attack China and attack Russia. Okay, well, that's nonsense, right? Like, you can't allow that. And the moment that you get rid of it, it's like, oh my God, they're being an authoritarian. They're not even allowing Twitter and Facebook in their countries. But that's what they were doing with Russia, right? Like, you could do anything pro-Ukrainian on Russia that you wanted. You can make it up. You can do whatever you want. The moment that you put pro-Russian content, they would get rid of it. If you had RT, Sputnik, any of that stuff, it just wasn't allowed. It's just wow. I agree with you, by the way.
Same thing. If you do anything that criticizes Israel, right? See how long
Yes.
you last if you criticize Israel. But it's the entire infrastructure of the internet, not simply the providers, the social media companies like Facebook and Twitter and YouTube. I mean, I can't even post comments for the most of the time on my own programs because I get censored, by the algorithm. But not the US controls the backbone of the internet. That what I'm referring to is, the physical structures and the routers of the internet, and they also control the tech companies, the social media companies that have a monopoly on the internet, and therefore they control what people see, hear, read, write, etc. It's an extraordinary power, and these social media companies are all in bed with the U.S. national security state. I mean, they are the one and the same. And so this is what we are up against, and this is why it's so hard to break through, the fog of the propaganda. And it just means that everybody has to work harder, both individually and collectively, to undermine these tech bro, um, hegemonic
Yeah.
propagandas.
I'm curious. Does that anti-corruption flow through Xi Jinping? Because, by the way, it did when Putin got in, and they thought, okay, this is going to be Boris Yeltsin 2.0, and he was not. He was going after oligarchs. He was centralizing power. He was getting rid of many of these monopolistic forces that allowed them to control Russia in the way that they were controlling Russia. It sounds like Xi Jinping did something very similar. Is it a party issue or is it a Xi Jinping issue? Meaning, is this they're acting this way because Xi Jinping is in charge and he is the one that is saying, this is what we're going to do because we're pushing back against the hegemony. We need to be, if not pure, at the very least, not overtly corrupt. Or is this a party that recognizes we are under pressure from hegemonic forces in the West that we need to push back against, and so we need to not be corrupt? Which one is it?
I would say it's the latter, because it's the party that elected Xi Jinping. The
Right.
party has the ability to self-correct. You see this all the time. The party is always self-reflexive. It's always self-correcting. It's always reflecting on what its mistakes are and what it can do better. When they have the National Congress, Legislative Congress, it's not like patting themselves on their back. It's really like strong self-criticism that they're doing. They're saying, we did these, we accomplished these things, and we fell short on these things. We need to do better on these things. So it is a political system that has the capacity for self-reflection and learning in accordance with their socialist principles and a dialectical worldview, which our system does not have that capacity. It doesn't have the capacity to self-reflect because it is not open to feedback. Certainly, it does not want any feedback from the bottom. It just tells itself the same old stories. A bunch of high-powered lawyers telling themselves the same narratives back and forth between each other, which is why we're caught in this doom loop of utter and complete detachment from reality and stupidity, which results in extraordinary, extraordinary violence.
So just to be clear, there's no coup attempt that we're aware of. Xi Jinping is not dropping dead in 2 years that we're aware of. He is not invisible in regards to China, where people are maneuvering in order to, I guess, have this kind of military takeover. And one of the other last parts before I get off this woman, she said, when the military takes over, they're going to attack Russia. And I said, oh my God. I was like, okay, you had lost me before, but now you have really lost your mind. I don't believe that for a moment. But she had 40,000 views in like a few hours, which means that video is going to get like 250,000 views, if not more. And I sat there and said to myself, oh my God. Just, oh my God.
Well, clearly something or somebody is boosting her. So, they want her out there. They want her to spew her nonsense. Now, I mean, as anything, there is a tiny, tiny fragment of truth there, is that there are Western liberal factions in China, just as you have, wealthy corporate bosses in China. They're all muzzled. And, the Western liberal factions, they largely do their debates inside academia. So, there are people who studied in the United States. They come back from the United States and they talk about, we need to do things the way the US does it. Of course, what nobody tells them, or, they don't realize, is they have been coddled in an extraordinary hothouse environment of the United States. That is, they go to Harvard, Kennedy, or they go to Stanford. And then if you stay on Stanford, we call it the bubble, right? I mean, it's kind of this idyllic and idealistic community with extraordinary wealth, mind-boggling wealth. The student lounge couches are, $10,000 each. It's like you're in Brunei or something. Uh,
Hmm.
then you have, luscious and amazing food, and everybody seems to be talking and dialoguing with each other. And these Chinese scholars think this is what the rest of the United States is like. And of course not. Just step out, a few miles in East Palo Alto and you'll see, what the US is really like. But for them, they're exposed only to this kind of hothouse bubble of US academia. And they think they generalize that to the rest of the United States. They come back and they say, look, the US is doing great. And, in China, our students are in dorms, and, they work really, really hard. And it's not this, sybaritic a society of luxury. And so they come back and then they argue for, kind of neoliberal reforms and things like that. And of course, there are other voices, much more progressive voices that argue against them, but they do not control the party. At certain points in China's history, recent history, they've had a stronger effect. And the key thing to understand about China's system is, one is it's meritocratic. That is, they believe in bringing up the best people to the top. You do not get to be the ambassador because, like Jim Hormel, you are the spam king, right? And you donated, $1 billion to an administration. You do not get an ambassadorship simply because you are a tycoon, who can throw money at the party. That kind of stuff doesn't happen. Nobody buys their way into Tsinghua University, just like you can buy your way into Harvard, Yale, Princeton, any of those schools. Simply, you just have to pay enough money. But nobody buys their way into Tsinghua or Beijing U. So the Chinese system is meritocratic. And then the second piece is that it tries to work in a scientific fashion. It's the conceit is scientific socialism, but you do something in a scientific fashion means you try it out and you see if it works. And if it works, you try and replicate it. So you do it in a small region or small city. If it works, you try and replicate it. If it replicates, then you try scaling it. If it scales, then it works. Then you apply it across the nation. And they work always in this scientific fashion because the Chinese leadership are about 80% scientists, as opposed to the US, where 95% are all lawyers. Lawyers make their living telling stories. We call this storytelling the theory of the case. But essentially, their worldview is that if we tell a story and our storytelling skills are better, we win. The Chinese don't function like that. They believe that you ground your approach in a scientific method and you see if something works, you test it. If it works and it shows evidence through testing, then you replicate the test. If the test replicates, then you scale the test, et cetera, and then you derive general principles from it. So that's how the Chinese work. That's their approach to governance. And so far, it is working. It's working so well that very recently, Adam Tooze, historian, said that China is rewriting the very concept of what it means to do development, what it means to do energy, what it means to, develop a society. China is rewriting the rules on that because prior to that, the conceit was always that development was always westernization and development is always becoming more capitalist. China's saying you don't have to do that. You don't have to invade other countries, colonize other countries, exploit other countries, or exploit, the world in order to become rich and, developed. There is another way. And so I think that is, groundbreaking. And it's also the reason why the US feels that it has to destroy China, if for no other reason than it being, the threat of a good example.
There's also a racist element to it.
Absolutely. Yes.
I mean, it's built into it. It's like the way they look at other countries. Oh, well, Russia is clearly a gas station masquerading as whatever. China, oh, they can't clearly have a better system in the way that they organize their system. Like they just, yeah, it's a very odd vigor associated with it. One of my guests, it was an audience member the other day, asked about Gaza. Now, at this point, the world has come to the conclusion that either a genocide has taken place or at the very least is starving people in mass. The world has come to the conclusion, and this is even in Western governments, because you can see these weak leaders trying to cover their ass with statements. So in posterity, when people look back and say, hey, your country was back in this genocide, then they can say, hey, I have a letter here where I said that, I look poorly upon starving kids. I know China is against it. I know Russia is against it. But there is a certain amount of criticism that gets aimed at China and Russia for that matter, because there is a convention under the United Nations, and I am the first one to say there's no such thing as international law, so it's a bit rich that I'm invoking this. But there is a convention that points out that states can get involved when other states are committing a genocide. Meaning, if I am murdering people in mass, then another state can come in and say, hey, stop doing that. And that the General Assembly or the UN Security Council, I know the United States blocks all of those, can take a much larger role in that. But you don't need those things in order to, let's say, be more boisterous. I was trying to make the point. People make the argument that, well, why is China continuing the trade with Israel? Israel at this point is obviously a client of the United States. The United States has been doing any and everything in their power to undercut China's prosperity and growth. So why would they assist in the destruction of a population? Give me your take on that.
Yeah, I don't have good insights, but what I would argue is that, the Chinese, probably to a fault, try to uphold both the letter and the spirit of international law. And the international law says that unilateral sanctions are illegal. So you have to go through the UN Security Council. The second piece that I would point out specifically regarding trade, and here's the thing to really, really notice about the people who are making these criticisms. The people who are making these criticisms of China, by and large, are Americans.
Yes, that's fair.
And so the Americans who are specifically underwriting, funding, and enabling the genocide, that is to say, the US government, the government of the people who are doing this criticism, they see fit to criticize a third party who is, who is not a party to the genocide. And so
Right.
What's the thinking that goes on behind that kind of mindset, right? That you think that you are the person punching down on these, dying Palestinians, and then you're claiming that somebody else, should do something. Stop me. Why aren't you stopping me? Why aren't you doing something? Let me point out a few other points, okay? Francesca Albanese has come out with a list of corporations that are involved in the genocide. They are, yeah, you have it right there. If you can put it on the screen, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they're all the usual suspects. It's the U.S. Monopoly capitalist, Microsoft, Google, the U.S. Military corporations, all the usual suspects, right? Why is there not a boycott of these usual suspects, of these, genocide complicit corporations? The fact is that China does trade. China does trade with everybody, and it trades also with, for example, Cuba, Nicaragua, Venezuela, Iran, Russia, all the countries that the empire is trying to take down. It does a little bit of trade with Israel, but in terms of the general amount of trade, it is pretty trivial. And China, when it does trade, it also does trade in services with other countries. For example, where does Yemen get its targeting information from?
Yes.
That's Chinese, the Chinese equivalent of, it's the Beidou system that gives Yemen its coordinates. Okay, so I think that if you take, I don't know the internal workings of the Chinese, government, but if you take the general balance of what China is doing against imperialism versus what it's doing for imperialism, it comes out far ahead in terms of what it is doing against imperialism, against Zionism, and for the development and the growth of the global South. I believe that if China did target Israel, then all the knives would come out, and very rapidly you would see much faster pivot to China. I think we would see war much faster.
Okay, I do get that.
Mm-hmm.
I even agree with that, kind of.
Well, let me ask you one more question, Jamal, then. China not only does trade with Israel, as I said, not a significant amount, but it does do trade with Israel. China also does trade with the United States, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the United States is the enabler of the genocide. It is a party to the genocide. In fact, it is the underwriter. It is the country that is responsible for the genocide, in that it creates the material conditions, the weaponry, the funding that allows it to happen. So the people who argue this, who are mostly Americans, we have to ask them, should China stop doing all trade with the United States?
Oh, I do get it. No, I totally get your argument. And like I said, I predominantly agree with the argument.
Mm-hmm. So I think it's important for Americans. They should use their energy to pressure their own government, which is the enabler of the genocide, rather than complain about distant third parties that are U.S. enemies over whom they have no influence. We're supposed to have influence over our own government. So I think the focus and the energy should be on the U.S. government rather than a third party over which you have no influence, unless your agenda is to amplify U.S. propaganda and deflect from U.S. responsibility. I
don't think it removes U.S. responsibility at all. I think the United States is the main proponent that is allowing this genocide to take place. If the United States says stop, it stops. But let's take it to Nazi Germany for a moment. There's a reason why it's built. And again, I'm not attacking China on this. I feel this way about Russia. I feel this way about Turkey. I feel this way about all of those states. Isn't genocide a world issue? Which is the reason why they put it into the United Nations. What do they call it? The documentation of the United Nations. There's a word for it. It'll come to me in a moment. But they put it into that byline because they looked at it as, this is something as a world that we should not allow and we should not be okay with. Meaning this is so beyond the pale of what it means to be a human being that any state, meaning Ansar Allah, is justified in attacking Israel or attacking shipping in order to stop it. Ansar Allah has nothing to do with it. And yet they take it upon themselves to say, we don't like this. This is against us being human beings in and of itself. It's that grotesque that it shouldn't be allowed to take place. Or any state could do it for all intents and purposes. I'm not saying that China should invade.
I agree with you. I think that.
Just be clear. I'm not singling out China. I'm only bringing up China because I'm talking to you.
I agree with you on the principle. I absolutely agree with you on the principle. And I also want to point out that the empire, in particular the US empire, is built on genocide. It's built on genocide from top to bottom, from the start to the current moment. And the genocide that we're seeing in Palestine, when you starve people deliberately en masse, that is genocide. That is genocide, right? So what's going on right now is genocide. And it's also the first live stream genocide. We've had a series of genocides. They've been nonstop. But the US itself was built on genocide. when you have these, liberals, they come out and they do a land recognition. We're on such and such tribe's native land, and they do the land recognition. That is such BS, in my opinion, because that recognition is 500 years too late, right?
Right.
500 years overdue. And if you actually do recognize the land and the original inhabitants of the land, then it's not simply enough to do a recognition. You have to express remorse, you have to make reparation, and you have to make redress, and you have to return the land. You should return the land. Don't just go off and make this kind of token incantation, we recognize blah, 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 and then think you're done. Because by doing that, you're actually covering up. You're not acknowledging anything. You are covering up genocide. That's why those people, they never say, we come from you from, Miwok, traditional Miwok lands. They will never use the word genocided Miwok, right? They will only say the name of the tribe. They will never acknowledge the tribe has been genocided. Start with the understanding that the Native American tribes have been genocided, and then ask yourself, if you recognize that fact, then what else can you do? And that involves remorse, reparation, redress, and return. That's where you need to go. But you won't. But they won't go there. And so it's just this little formula that they do to pat themselves on the back and make themselves feel good. So coming from that standard, we have to understand that the entire empire was built on genocide. Right after World War II, what happened? Well, Korea was split into two.
Yep.
Genocide, genocidal atrocities, right? In Korea, they had these things called the Border League massacres. Up to 1.2 million people, anybody who was registered as a leftist, was killed. They were rounded up and shot and dumped into large ditches. The world's largest mass grave, the longest mass grave on the planet, is in South Korea. It's over 10 football fields long. There are 150 mass graves that are not excavated. They would also shoot them and dump them in the ocean. And the Japanese government complained to the Korean government, there are too many dead bodies washing up on our shores 500 miles away. 500 miles away on Japanese shores, there were countless Korean bodies washing up on Japanese shores because the US was perpetrating a genocide. It was killing off all the leftists. That set the template for what happened in 1964 to 1966, which was the Indonesian genocide, right? 1.5 million leftists shot to death in the streets. The streets were running with blood. The rivers were running crimson. They were clogged with bodies. This is how the empire was constructed. During the Korean War, 4 million Koreans killed. A fifth or a quarter of the population of North Korea. I mean, you think Gaza is bad? Yes, it's horrific. It's unthinkable. And expand that, by tenfold. That's what you had in Korea. And then right after Korea, then we went into both Indonesia and the Vietnam and Southeast Asian wars. Again, another genocide, right? So the empire is genocidal. It's genocidal from top to bottom. It's genocidal from its intent, its structure, its practices. It's all genocidal. And so then the question becomes, what do you do about this? Is it a global issue? Absolutely. It is a global issue. It's something that humanity needs to rise up and, absolutely do everything it can to prevent. And we also understand that the purveyors of genocide have total impunity. And then the benefactors, the people who benefit from genocide, are the ones who are, making weak and vague statements and trying to get other countries to prevent their country from committing genocide. I think it's important that people in the United States and in the Western core, that they start to do something about it. All of them can do something, and they're not. And they're simply saying, woe is me, or look at those bad countries, those third countries that we have no influence. They should be doing something, as opposed to, Google, Alphabet, Microsoft, all the US corporations that are direct participants in this genocide.
KJ, I agree with everything that came out of your mouth. I do. I swear to God, I do. And I am not, look, we talk all the time, I think every Wednesday. I am not picking on China in this. If I was talking to somebody about Russia, I would think the same thing. If I was talking to somebody in Timbuktu, I would think the same thing. The United States has gone rogue. It's a rogue actor. It's a country that has lost control of it.
It's always been rogue, Jamal. It's always
That's
been
fair.
rogue. Yes.
And I agree with that. And by the way, me pointing at this doesn't undercut what has taken place in the Congo, doesn't undercut what took place in Korea, doesn't undercut any of that stuff. All of those things were trouble. My lineage is Native American, right? My grandpa was a Cherokee. And apparently there's Native American even on my grandmother's side. So I get it in a real sense that, yes, this country has always been genocidal in the way that it acted. It went from a genocide to slavery. I get it. I'm not picking on China. There may be some people who are just these liberals who, I'm not a liberal. I'm not picking on China. I feel this way about every country that is allowing a rogue actor to effectively murder people and starve people, especially, you're starving babies. Like, however bad it was in South Korea, that doesn't change the fact that there are babies starving or being shot for sport by a genocidal monster of a country that the US is back to the hilt and has put all sorts of money in. I get it. From the point of view, it's like, dude, you're the country that are doing it. How are you bitching about this to other countries? You have my full agreement. You have my full agreement. I just don't know how to corral my own country. And in the case of, let's say, Nazi Germany, where you had Germans, where they were having concentration camps, and they were throwing Jews into the ovens, it took other countries to corral that country. It took third countries. Because
it took Russia waging a total war. The US was enabling the genocide. The Holocaust, IBM produced the punch cards that allowed the Holocaust to happen. The US was selling, goods and steel and, to the Axis powers. It came in very, very late. It was the Russians who tore the guts, or the USSR that tore the guts out of the Nazis. And, so that's another piece of history that's
80% of every Nazi that died on the Eastern Front.
Yes.
I mean, like the wars over there was just astonishing. No, I don't want to give the sense that I'm picking on China. I'm not. I see my country as a rogue actor in the world. We set fires. And pressure on some level needs to be applied on Israel, A, but as you point out, on the principal country that is effectively doing it, B. Part of the reason why I am looking forward to the US passing all of these sanctions or tariffs is because I want it to get the rude awakening that it deserves in this case, or that it's getting beat in Ukraine. And I'm like, good job. It's getting beat in Ukraine. At some point, it's going to come to a reckoning of, hey, we're falling apart. Or when they lose, we lose as a country, the primary currency. All of these things are going to be reckonings. There are canaries in the coal mines all over the place that we are just fundamentally ignoring. By the same token, as you've pointed out on more than one occasion, we need to be able to get to that point without destroying the world in the process. So I get it. I get it. It's a bit rich coming from the US saying, hey, somebody help us or stop us because we can't stop ourselves. I do get it.
Well, but Jamal, let me tell you a story, and it's both. I don't know if it's the right story, but I'll tell it to you.
Anyway. Go for it. It probably is.
Many, many years ago, there was a young man. He was a student, and he saw a young woman being sexually assaulted in front of his eyes on the street. Okay, and the rapists were armed policemen. Okay. and he realized that he had very few options in the moment. That he could try and make a difference, but he could also get himself killed, and he could also get the young woman killed. So he decided that he was going to create a situation where that could never happen again. The name of that young man was Ho Chi Minh, and the rapists were the French colonial police. And he eventually kicked all the police out of the country. So the thing is that it's not that we don't have to address the immediate, urgent fire that's happening before our eyes. We have to try something. We have to do our best. But we also have to think bigger, systemically, structurally, over the long term. And we also have to organize, and we have to make connections and build allies so that we can take on the enormity of the task. And so I want to invite people that, yes, there is burning urgency because there is a genocide happening in front of our eyes. And also, even as we try our best to address the immediate urgent fire that's going on, we also have to think bigger and think, even despite the urgency, what are the ways that we can get to the root core of the issue? And then also, every single person needs to take whatever small, personal, and direct action that is possible. Let me give you another example. So South Korea almost had a military coup about 7 months ago. And
Right.
you look in the media, you'll see images of people fighting the troops, young women going hand to hand with special forces troops who are, armed to the teeth. Now that's courage. What you don't know is that thousands of parents, the moment they heard about the coup, thousands of parents called their kids in the barracks and said, you have to drop your arms, or at the very least, you have to make sure that you do not harm anybody. And so then the effect of that was that the coup failed. But this is the stuff that happened, beneath, under, behind the scenes. So I guess, my point is, how do we directly influence the genocidal war machine? Okay. Everybody needs to think about, how do we make a difference? How do we put pressure directly, not just indirectly? Great. We do the protest. Great. You lobby your senator. Great. They're going to ignore you, but you lobby them anyway. But also, how do you get directly in touch with the corporations or the people working for the corporations that are working in logistics, finance, accounting, transportation? How do you get in touch with them and try and wake up their conscience so that they do a small gesture that makes some kind of difference? We all have 6 degrees of separation. I think that it's important that everybody try and use whatever tiny level of influence they have to try and to stop this genocidal war machine that is wiping out the Palestinians. I think everybody needs to try something along those lines, and at least try and get them to do no harm. Every little bit matters. Every little bit makes a difference. And I think that's what we need to do, rather than making grandiose statements about other people and what they should be doing.
Again, KJ, I want to just nail down. I am not picking on China.
No, I understand.
Yeah.
But yes, but what I'm saying here is that we have to think bigger. Really, we have to think bigger, because it's not just about what's happening. It is about the genocide that's happening right now, but we also have to understand that the empire is genocidal. It always is, always has been, always will be. And so that's the issue. That's the challenge that we have to deal with. And it's not about making, a silly land, recognition, something that happened 500 years ago. It's about doing something now and doing it for the future.
Okay. Fair enough. I understand your point. Again, I want to emphasize I'm not picking on any country. I know it's a bit rich that somebody from the US is making this case, or not making the case, but kind of pointing out the world. When China puts a man on the moon, or when China sent their satellite in space, I didn't look at it as a Chinese development, even though it was. I looked at it as a human development. When Buzz Aldrin and what is his name, Neil Armstrong, stepped on the moon, I didn't look at it as an American development, even though it was. I looked at it as this is a human achievement. And when we send something to Mars or something else, regardless of the country that does it, I'm going to say that's a human achievement. Yes, we're individual nations. Agreed. And individual nations can do things that are fantastic, or they can do things that are horrendous. Because all of us are human beings, when I'm looking at something that's a travesty in the world, whether we're doing it or whether somebody else is doing it, I'm looking at it as this is something that is happening on planet Earth that we are effectively doing. And do we have a commitment to one another as human beings to not allow shit like that to happen? Whether it's the US that is the sponsor of it because it's gone rogue, just like Nazi Germany went rogue, or whether it's another country that is doing it. Obviously, I'm not for any of those other travesties that you're talking about, that we've had a litany of them. And you can make the case where they have been far worse in regards to the number of people that have died and that have been killed. And I would imagine if I was around during that time, I would probably have felt the exact same way. I wasn't around during that time. I am around now. And you have a world that effectively has decided that a group of people are disposable, with the United States being the main purveyor of saying these people are disposable. And because the US is a hegemon, as you point out, the cops, no other country wants to get involved. They want to give these platitudes. Oh my God, we're putting this for posterity. I think that's a travesty. I'm not picking on China on this. I'm saying this as a human being living on.
The ruling elite has decided that everybody is disposable except themselves. Whatever is happening in Gaza is coming for the rest of the world.
To us too. Yeah.
Yes.
Again, KJ, I want to make it very plain. I wasn't picking on China. I'm trying to nail that down.
No, I'm not accusing you of that, okay. Jamal. Okay. I'm just pardon me. I'm just on my soapbox because I think this is important. But let's look on the bright side, if there is, right? I mean, it's hard to believe that there is a bright side, but the global South is getting stronger and stronger. Yeah. They are building connections. They're building out. The U.S. is trying to create these random conflicts and wars all around the world, most recently between Thailand and Cambodia. Certainly, the U.S. is the it benefits from that. But we can see that the global South is going from strength to strength. And at the same time, what you're also seeing is that the U.S., as it loses its influence over the global South, it turns the screws tighter on its so-called allies. So it essentially what it's doing to Europe or Germany, it's going to make that even tighter. And so it's the quote unquote US allies that are going to feel the full brunt of this transforming world, because they are being forced to become even more subordinate to daddy. In fact, what Ursula von der Leyen, she recently came out with this proclamation about her relationship with the US. Essentially, she's saying the same thing that Mark Rutte is saying. Mark Rutte is saying daddy, or rather he's saying whatever you want, daddy. And
that sounds so dirty. Whatever you want, daddy.
Is saying the same thing, except she's saying it in bureaucratic, economic terms, which she's saying daddy knows best. Whatever daddy wants, daddy gets. And that's what she's saying. And of course, there are contrarians who, use an IR framework, international relations framework, and they say, well, this is just Europe trying to prevent abandonment by the United States. They're trying to entrap US into, Europe's security and economic architecture.
Yeah.
And, I mean, it's hair splitting, or rather delusion, because it's like the prisoner thinking that they have handcuffed the police onto him. No,
Yeah.
that's not what has happened. The police have handcuffed you. You haven't handcuffed the police onto you. But this is the classical neorealist international relations framing. They always claim that subaltern countries are trying to entrap the great powers, their patrons, into their security arrangements to serve their security needs and to avoid abandonment. This is just psychologizing. It's the equivalent of thinking that the subaltern is saying, "Massa, don't leave. Massa, please don't leave me." Right? It's ridiculous. It's absurd. It's nonsense. If you want to follow that logic, it's the psychologizing logic. If you want to follow that kind of psychologizing logic, what you're really saying is that the enmeshment has happened to such an extent that the subaltern, or the child, if you will, has been engulfed into the ideology of the patron or the hegemon. And they've internalized the hegemon's needs as their own. And then they feed it back to the hegemon saying, "Please don't leave me, Massa, don't leave." And then the patron graciously and reluctantly obliges. It's just one big rigmarole.
Do you have about 15 minutes? Because I want to get into that, and I want to ask you about Cambodia.
Yes, please
Okay.
go ahead.
But there's a logic to that. They are thinking that way. I mean, they have internalized the notion.
The
From
ruling
Europe-
elite have. The ruling
Yes.
elite, the von der Leyens have. Yes.
Yeah, from the standpoint of Europe and, let's say, Britain, this quote unquote white world, you may even include Australia in this, they recognize that as states, they're paupers. They can't even compete with China. Lord knows they can't compete with Russia on the world stage. They are nothing. And they have latched themselves almost like a leash to America's ass with the thought of, as long as we suck this ass, we will be great. And we will associate ourselves with this, the Goliath on the planet. And so on some level, they've internalized whatever is good for Goliath, even if they don't like it, by the way. Europe has been getting trashed. And yet they still look to themselves and say, in order for us to have any significance on the global stage, for us to have a voice, for us to matter, we need to be associated with the Goliath. In which case, Daddy, what do you need? Daddy, we're with you. Daddy, etc. And Daddy says, you're our vassals, and we will take your tribute, and we will go along with this. But I'm trying to make the point of saying, that is in their minds. That is the way they look at this. Like, you may say, okay, well, you've internalized the slave position. But okay, what if the master leaves? Then they're nothing. Their influence in the globe goes up in smoke. Their voice in the globe goes up in smoke. Their military capability, which is pretty much non-existent, goes up in smoke. Meaning they need that master in order to be anything. Like, do you get my point? Like, or do you disagree with that?
Well, I mean, yes. So we can argue that they're, sub-imperial states that sometimes people use. Essentially, yeah, it's the sidekick. The sidekick is nothing without the bully. So they need the bully to be around, so that they can have, kind of a, residual force and power. But my question back to you would be, does the master ever leave? Right? Will the master ever leave? Will they relinquish their power?
I think Europe has doubled down on the declining empire. Like, Europe could have went to China and say, hey, let's make a deal. They could have reached out to the rest of the world. They could have resisted. But this is all they know. Do you remember there's a Saturday Night Live skit of porn stars? And I think it's like 3 or 4 guys. And they decide to leave their job as porn stars and go working at a cafe or something like that. And the moment that anybody comes up and says, hey, can I get a shake? It's like, I'll give you some shake. And it's like, oh my God. It's like, this is all I know. That's Europe. This is all we know. Like, they're just porn stars that are out of work, overweight, fat, can't really perform in the way that they used to perform. And they found somebody where they can get a paycheck off. They don't know anything else. These are former imperial empires that have ego, that believe that, they are the greatest thing to walk the earth. And yet their empires have been wrapped up. Their militaries are trash. And they see, as you point out, sub-imperial powers that have latched themselves onto the US with the belief that this somehow gives them this boost of history, this still European elitism that, if they look in the mirror, doesn't exist, but it's in their minds. And they require America to function that way. So I get it. And you can make the case of saying, these guys are slaves that don't quite fully understand that they're slaves. Fair enough. That's true. But it's also true.
They're house servants.
Yeah.
They're house servants. Yes.
Yeah.
Citizens in the imperial core, they benefit from imperialism.
Yeah. Okay, that's fair. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
One last thing, Cambodia. Give me your take on that. So this came out today or yesterday? I got to be honest with you. I wasn't sure about the Cambodia thing. I wasn't sure it both had agency. I wasn't sure what was going on with this. Royal Cambodian Armed Forces delegation visits United States Indo-PACOM for bilateral defense dialogue. Now, it seems that in that conflict, that Cambodia was undermanned, or let's say outgunned in real terms. Yes, they had guys with no shoes on who was firing machine guns and weapons, and I think they had war elephants, which I felt bad for the elephant because I think it was going to die. But I get the sense that the Thai military is probably stronger than Cambodian military. I didn't know what was going on with this. There was something about the church. There was something about previous grievances. There was something about Thai's political situation getting fractured. Give me a take. It doesn't have to be long. I'm just curious on how you see it.
It's still a developing situation. I think Brian probably has a pretty good take on it, Brian Berletic, but I think we need to watch the situation more carefully. I mean, we know the material facts. The Thai military is 3 times larger than the Cambodian military. It has a budget 7 times the size of the Cambodian military. They have advanced weapons, and the budget, the GDP of Thailand is 10 times that of Cambodia. So it is very, very hard to conceive that Cambodia would initiate an attack on a much larger, more powerful adversary unless it felt like it had something or somebody else in its corner. Now, everybody's talking about the causes, but there are 3 ways of thinking about a cause. It's like, why was the window broken? We can say the window was broken because it was made of glass and glass shatters. We can say the window was broken because somebody threw a rock into that. And then we can say the window was broken because a thief was trying to get in to my house, etc. Right? So we can think of causes in 3 ways. The material cause, which is the underlying conditions, the efficient cause, which is the triggering cause, what we usually think of as the cause, and then the teleological cause, which is the object or the goal of what we're trying to do. So in this situation, everybody pretty much agrees on the material causes. Essentially, it's a lingering border dispute caused by colonial carve-up by the French in 1907. And this has happened everywhere. Asia, Myanmar, India, Pakistan, India, China, all of this. These are imperial carves up. And then we also have the maritime disputes caused by, the maritime UN close regime. So everybody generally agrees on the material cause. And they also agree on the efficient cause. That is, there were recent skirmishes where soldiers died, and these happened around a contested temple. So there's agreement on the material cause and the efficient cause. It's the thing that people don't really have clarity on is the teleological cause, or the reason or the objective of this. What is the goal? What's the objective of these skirmishes? Does it have to do with, the Thaksin family or, Hun Sen's family trying to consolidate power, show themselves as, the legitimate, rulers of their country? Does it have to do with U.S. attempts to lure China into a border war or create just more disruption in Southeast Asia? Does it have to do with kind of internal factions inside Thailand between the military and the civilian government that are at loggerheads, that are trying to use war to boost their, power and prestige? Are they trying to undermine the military? Is this just a general U.S. intervention to accelerate coup processes or disintegration in Thailand and in Southeast Asia? It's hard to say, Brian, from Jamal, from where I stand. I think that Brian makes a lot of really good points, and I intend to, kind of monitor his analysis. And there's some very important points we need to put out, that people don't understand how closely Cambodia is tied to the U.S. Military machine, and also the way in which Cambodia has been a haven for Thai color revolutionaries. These are very, very important facts. and we also have to point out that Thaksin Chinawat is a Marcos type Western quisling that the U.S. very, very much wants back in full power. There's a conflict between the military and civilian government in Taiwan. The Thailand's military and the monarchy, they want good relations with China, and the civilian government wants to go, to be U.S. quislings. And of course, ultimately it boils down to the fact that the U.S. wants to divide and disrupt Asia, in particular Southeast Asia. So whatever's going on is just the beginning, I believe. Just as we see in Myanmar, that's an unending conflict. I think there's potential for a lot more conflict in Southeast Asia. So the big picture is whatever's happening, I believe that the empire of chaos probably has some hand in what is going on. And I expect that as we accelerate to World War III, we will see more and more of these kind of small conflicts that will just make the conflagration worse and worse. It's not an optimistic assessment, but I think that we need to watch things carefully. The other thing I'll say is that there's this thing called signal detection theory. I don't know if you know. Essentially, anytime you get a signal, you're also going to get noise mixed in at the same time. And noise get mixed in together. And they usually, both signal and noise form, a statistical normal curve. And sometimes signal and noise are more distinct. Sometimes they're more intertwined. But depending on where you set your criteria, if you decide that you want to pick up all of the signals, then you're also going to mix in some noise, and you're going to get, false hits. And on the other hand, if you decide that you're only going to get pure signal and you're going to exclude all noise, then you are going to get, miss a lot of signals as well. And so we have to decide where on this, kind of curve, or this, bimodal curve, we want to set our detection. And depending on that, we're going to draw different conclusions. And I think, for example, Brian is highly tuned into capturing all the signals. Carl, for example, just as an example, is more interested in pure signal. And I see myself as, just kind of monitoring the entire spectrum. So all of this is a fancy way of saying,
it's unclear.
Going on. It's not quite clear yet.
Right. Right. KJ, thank you for this. Yeah, because Carl's thing was, these people have agency. This is about a long-running feud. And Berletic is more in terms of, this was wider war. These are fault lines that the U.S. is, or the empire is getting involved in. And I'm like, okay, I don't know which. We'll see. I guess I'm on your side on this one.
Important question to ask here. We're really trying to figure out what is the, purpose, the objective, the teleological course. And to answer that question, we really have to ask who benefits, cui bono. Just keep asking that question and follow the money.
KJ, always enjoy talking to you. I really do. I always learn something in these conversations. I always get something out of it. And I think the audience does also. Thank you for this. I really appreciate it. KJ No, journalist, political analyst, writer, teacher specializing in the geopolitics of the Asia Pacific region, contributor to the book Capitalism on a Ventilator. That book is available at iacenter.org. You can find KJ on Breakthrough News Network, China Report. KJ, when is your next report coming out?
One came out last week. It'll be next week. And I just did Dr. Wilma Leon's show yesterday.
Did you? Wilmer is fantastic. Wilmer is awesome. That's awesome. That is very cool. Yeah,
So
Wilmer
the
is
show is Connecting the Dots. You can check it out.
Okay, and that one is already out?
It's already out. Came out yesterday. Wilma Leon's Connecting the Dots.
Yeah, Wilmer is good. That should be a really good interview. Funny, he's knowledgeable, doctor. I mean, he's fantastic. Thank you for this, KJ. I really appreciate it, man.
Thank you.
You be safe. Have a good one. All right, we have come to the end.